Hey YouTube, 1986 Foxbody Mustang, going to be replacing the rag joint. Got this kit from LMR, comes with the hardware and the rag joint, which is like a neoprene disc. That's pretty well what's disintegrated on mine, which is why I need to replace it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is there are going to be a lot of little snippets here, so I'm supposed to watch in the camera and bouncing around. Actually going to be a lot of fade in and fade outs. Alright, so you can see the top of the steering shaft up there. There's one bolt. That's going to have to be loosened off. And then from the bottom side, let me try to show you here. Alright, so this is coming in through the wheel well. And if you see in behind the coil there, you could see the bottom of the rag joint. And not really accessible from here. So we're going to have to access this from the bottom of the car. So I got the vehicle up on axle stands right now. And I'll show you how we're going to get in at this from underneath. Alright, from underneath the vehicle, you can see the steering shaft here, and this is the rag joint right here. And I'm thinking on the far side of this, there's a bolt that needs to come out that actually keeps it onto the shaft. So after I remove the top bolt, I'm going to have to turn the steering wheel so that the bolt is accessible from the bottom here. And then I can pop that off. Once the two bolts are off, there's not a lot of wiggle room. Actually, there's no wiggle room to take it off here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the steering rack. I'm going to loosen it off and remove or pull it to the front. By doing that, that'll give me some slack here, and then hopefully I can work at removing the rag joint. And what I've been doing the last couple of days is putting some WD-40 on here, so I'm hoping that helps in the process of removing this. So let me just go to the front of the vehicle here and show you where the steering rack is and how I'm going to be removing that. Alright, so looking from the front of the vehicle towards the back, you can see the steering rack here in the front. There's two bolts that hold it on. There's one on the right here. I'm going to be removing that bolt. There's one on the left. I'm going to be removing that bolt. And I'm going to take those right out. And that will allow, after I loosen off remove the bolts from the rag joint, I can probably try to wedge the steering rack forward a little bit to give me the slack I need to remove that. So that's going to be the process, and once I get the rag joint removed, obviously you're going to have to put the new one in and then put everything back together again. So that's the general philosophy of what I'm going to be doing here. Hopefully it works out okay, and yeah, alright, here we go. Alright, so I got the top bolt removed. You see that that's out, and I have the nut and bolt here. Essentially you're talking a 5/8 and an 11/16 to remove that. So first one down, on to the next. Alright, so now I'm going to take the bottom bolt off, and I've turned the steering shaft so that I could access the bolt fairly easy. That's the one right there, and that is a 7/16. So I'm going to take that off now. So I tried removing the 7/16 bolt, and even with the WD-40, it's totally rusted in there. The head on this thing is rounded off now, so I can't get it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen off the steering rack, pull it out a little bit. There's about an inch of play in there. I don't know if you'd actually see that. I'm hoping that, there you go. So I'm hoping that when I drop the steering rack, I could drop that extra inch I'm thinking is going to give me enough room to be able to use an extracting bit on that bolt and hopefully remove that. So again, not a lot of room in there, and when you get stuff that's rusted in there like that, it makes it really difficult. So alright, I'm going to remove the steering rack. I'm going to pull that forward. The front bolt on the steering rack is a metric on my car, and then the back one is an imperial. So just real quick here. Sorry about the bouncing around. Alright. Alright, there's the front bolt. The front bolt on my car is a 18mm, and then the back of that is actually 9/16. So I'm going to take that bolt there right out, and on the far side as well. And after that, I'm going to might need to use a pry bar. But I'm going to bring the steering rack forward, and I'm hoping that moves the rag joint down enough that I could access it with the extracting tool to remove that bolt. Alright, see how that goes. So I removed the bolts on the front of the steering rack and used a couple pry bars and put them in behind here, and it just took me a little while. Actually, it took me about 20 minutes to half an hour just slowly working the thing forward. The thing's on there that tight, but anyways, I got the thing forward enough to get the rag joint moved forward, and once I got it forward I had just enough room to let me show you what I got here. So went and picked up this afternoon a extracting bolt kit. So the plan here was to put this onto the battery drill and essentially just kind of drill and then kind of back it out. But the problem I ran into is this wasn't long enough. I didn't have enough room underneath to get at this, so I'm glad I bought this, but well, maybe I'll keep this for some other day. I'll probably be able to use it. So I went and see my neighbor. He's had some handy dandy tools. So actually he had a 7/16 tool for removing rounded bolt heads. So actually, and that's a 3/8. So I actually put a 3/8 to 1/2 inch adapter on that, I put my 1/2 inch impact on that, hammered it on the top of the bolt, and it took me a while, but I finally got the thing out, and I'm so thankful that it came out in one piece. So there's what's left of the 7/16 bolt that held the rag joint onto the steering column by the steering rack. All right, mouthful there. Anyways, you can see how it just kind of puts its teeth right in there, and it's a reverse direction one, so as it more tightens as it backs out. So it took me a little while, but I got it out, so thankful for that. So the next part I'm going to do, oh yeah, so I moved the rack forward. One of the things that happened when I moved the rack forward, I'll just show you, here is the top. You can see the top of the steering column inside there. I'll try to get some light on there, try to get it focused a little for you. All right, so when I moved the steering rack forward, that actually popped out, which is what I wanted as well. So that was good, and actually that's probably why it was a little hard to work the steering rack initially. But once that popped out, and essentially there's a little friction in there, once that was gone, it kind of came forward a little easier. So moving the rack forward actually gave me a clear run with the 1/2 inch impact to get that seized bolt out of there. So now I need to put the steering rack back in, and after I put it back in, I'm just going to push it back in, and then what I'm probably going to have to do is try to get the bar in there and slowly see if I can work this rag joint off the shaft of the steering rack here. So where I'm going to next, let me get a little light in here to see if you can see that. So there's the steering rack, and then right in back and behind here, there's the rag joint, and yeah, you can see the rest on it. Sorry about the jiggling here. Just going to try to focus in on that a little better. There we go. So you can see that. So anyways, that is where I need to go next. Let's see if I can't zoom in a little here too. Sorry, one-man show here. It's kind of tricky to do everything at once. So you can see that it's on the shaft. You can see all the rust there. I got to get that off the shaft now. So I'm going to push the rack back in, and at least that way I should be able to hammer it without this thing bouncing around too much, and hoping I could probably get I don't know, get some type of bar, maybe use the crowbar in there and just kind of slowly hammer it and try to work that off of the column there. So try to focus in. There we go. So you can see what I'm doing next. So anyways, so that's the plan. So here we are. So this is day 2 of working on this in the evening, and definitely I knew it wouldn't be a quick process, but slowly working my way through, and well, we're slowly getting there. All right, so next part, take the rag joint off the shaft of the steering rack. Okay, so I've got the rag joint removed from the steering rack, and I'm just going to show you, so here's what the steering rack looks like from where the rag joint was connected. I'm going to show you how I actually got this thing off finally. So looking from the front of the vehicle, you can see the shaft that the rag joint was sitting on. What I did was grab a crowbar, put the crowbar in at the base of the rag joint, and on the crowbar I just hit that with a sledgehammer and kept hitting it till finally came off. So that's how I finally got the thing there, and this is what the rag joint looks like. So the part that goes on the top of the steering column, the part that goes on the shaft from the steering rack, and this piece here sits right in the middle, and obviously you can see from mine there's nothing there. The only thing that came out was these 2 small pieces. So explains why the steering was really loose on the car. So I'm going to go through the process now of taking this apart and cleaning it up and putting it back together. Okay, well, there's no reason this job should get easy now. So what we have here is a 9/16 on the one end and a 14 mil on the other side. So these things are right seized on, they're rusted on, they're not going to come apart. So I got new hardware here for all these. Fortunate enough, I got a cutting tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these bolts here off. After I'm finished cutting these bolts off, then I'm going to switch to the grinding head on this. And then I'm going to, on the top here, hold on here, get around. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up grinding the top of these bolts off and pulling those through as well. And then installing new hardware on this. So all this old stuff here is just way too rusted. And not able to get it apart at all. Even after soaking it with WD-40, it's not helping at all. So, alright, so I'm going to cut these off now and we'll see where we go next. Okay, so let me just run down what I did here now. These bolts here were rusted on solid, so I actually used a cutting tool and cut those apart and removed them that way. So that's how I got the bottom piece off. These pieces here, I had to actually switch to a grinder, grind the top of the heads of these off. And once I grinded the top off, those just popped through. Not quite that easily, but anyways, so I think you're getting the gist of it. So having a grinding tool helps, having a cutting tool helps, unless you're somewhere in the southern states where you guys don't get salt. In that case, you guys are lucky. Alright, so some of the issues we got to deal with the Canadian weather. Alright, so got that all cut apart now, and essentially we're ready for reassembly. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean this all up. I have a special bit here that I put on my drill, and it's for paint and rust remover, I think it's called. And I'm going to clean this up and paint this with Trim Clad, get it fixed up nicely, kind of clean it up, put this back together, and we'll show you how that goes back together as well once I figure it out. Alright, next step, paint. Alright, so everything is painted now, so I can put this back together. Here's the rag joint kit that we got. Essentially we'll be using the bolt and the nut, this bolt and the nut, these two nuts, and these bolts here that go along with it as well. I'm not going to be using these pieces right here, but I will be using of course, the rag joint. So to start off with, I'm going to put this back onto the shaft. Alright, so this part here that's loose is going to get bolted on to this piece here. It doesn't really matter which way right now you put it on, if it's this way or the other way. It will matter a little more in a minute. So what I'm going to do is actually going to pause the video real quick, just put that together, and we'll take over from there. Okay, so we got the first part together. I have just finger tight for right now. So this loose piece here connects on to the part that goes on to the shaft from the steering rack. Got nut and bolts through there, which again finger tight. Now the part that's solid here, the solid shaft, those two holes there are going to go through the rag joint, and what I'm going to use on that. So now I've got this little triangular piece, and I got a little flat piece here, if I can find it, there we go, as well. And we're going to use those along with these. The triangular piece goes opposite the end where the bolt goes here. So this hole right here, we're going to put that on like that, so that the flat edge side is facing up towards the back here. So I'm just going to, again, pause the video, we can put those two through, and we'll come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've got the rag joint assembled. Everything's just finger tight right now. What I can do when I do tighten this down, I can put some Loctite on these. Last thing I want is this thing to come apart while I'm driving. Alright, so real quick recap here. This bracket here that's on a little bit on the loose side, the bolts go through that and actually bolt the base part on. That goes right through the rag joint, obviously. And the other two, so bolts, that's those black ones, they go on the opposite ends right here, and the triangular piece here will go on opposite where the open end here is. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. So anyways, that is what that will look like when it's assembled. It'll be a little tighter there when in a couple of minutes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back on the vehicle, but with all the power steering fluid I see in the front end of the car, I became kind of frustrated with the leaks on this. So what I've done actually, I ordered a brand new rack from LMR. Got a manual steering one going in, so I don't have to worry about the power steering leaks anymore. And so I've removed the power steering pump already. It's sitting here on the floor. I can take the rack out, put the new rack in. But when I get the old rack out, I'm going to show you how this assembles onto the shaft of the old rack, just so you can picture better how it goes back on. One of the things that I probably should have done before I took this apart is mark with a paint pencil the marking here from this base unit here to where it goes onto the shaft. Being there's not a lot of room in there, you can't see really clearly. It really is going to help a lot for when you put the unit back together again. Now, if you remember, when I took this thing out, I had to pretty well demolish it. That's the bolt that goes through here. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to go out and buy a brand new bolt on this. So it's only the bottom part that's threaded on this. So we'll see what I can find at the hardware store. If I can't find what I need, I'll probably have to just grind down some of the threads on the bolt I buy. And if you look at this carefully, you can actually see, it's not really obvious, but here there's a little bit of a gouge here in the middle part. And I'm guessing that's where it goes onto the shaft as well. So I may have to grind that in there as well. Other real quick note, when you're taking the old one apart, I used a cutting tool and a grinder. If you don't have a cutting tool and a grinder, you could always hacksaw cut the bolts. And for the two parts that I had to grind the heads off, or the riveted piece, you can actually drill those out with drills and then knock them out that way. That'll probably work for you as well, so I'll give you a little bit of an alternative to put that together. So I'm going to leave this for now. I am going to wait till I get the old steering rack out, and I'm going to get this tightened up as well, and then I'll show you how it assembles onto the rack. That'll be a quick one, and that'll be it. And I'll see if I can't sell that old rack and power steering pump, and I'll pay for a little bit of the new one I'm putting in. So anyways, hopefully that's helping so far. So last step is to put her back together. So the steering rack's been removed. This one bolt over here totally seized. Even with the sledgehammer, couldn't budge it at all. I was fortunate enough that this one here I could actually hit in far enough to at least get it flush with this bracket here. And these things are totally rusted in here, so I'm gonna have fun just getting it back out again. But anyways, you can remove the steering rack with the one intact and just by pushing the one back in. That was, and then the crowbar, and it comes out. Without that, for me, my oil pan was in the way and it wouldn't come out. So anyways, that's the steering rack's out, and I'll show you what the shaft looks like on that the rag joint sits on. So the steering rack's been removed and I got it cleaned up, and I didn't get all the rust off here, but you'll notice that on the one side of the shaft here, it's flat, and the rest is all round. And upon closer looking at the base of the rag joint, you can see there's a flat side in there, and the rest is all rounded. So the only way that this is going to fit on here is by you lining up the flat side perfectly. So again, reinforces that you may want to put a mark on the side of these with a paint marker or something like that, because now that this thing's out, it's fairly accessible, it's fairly easy to do, but when it's on the vehicle, you can barely even get at this. And the bolt, so I got myself a new bolt to go through the rag joint here, the base that goes onto the shaft. This is got it written down here, this is a 3/8 24 fine thread, and that's 1.5 inches long. So that works fine for replacing the one that was all rusted in there. All right, so that's about it. I know I'm not going to put this back in because I got myself a brand new one here, and that's a manual one with the bump steer on it. Got that from LMR, and I'm kind of hoping that way I don't have to worry about all the hydraulic fluid leaking, and probably get a better feel for the road. And most of my driving's on the country out anyways, so driving in the city's not going to be an issue too much with the no more power steering. So anyways, again, so I showed you how this thing all goes together. When you do put yours together, put a little bit of Loctite on it. And it's not a bad idea if you have some lithium grease, just to grease the top part here. So if you're going to do any painting on this, just make sure you don't get any paint on that in there on the joint, and put a little bit of lithium grease on it before you put it back in as well. So super pain in the butt to change. And again, last year I ended up putting new ball joints on this at Ford, and it cost me almost $1,000 because they were all seized on there. I couldn't get an alignment done on it. So I don't have cutting tools at home, so I paid Ford to do that. For the money I paid for it, I got it's what it cost me for a brand new rack, steering rack. So hindsight is always 20/20. So anyways, I hope it helps you guys. Sorry I didn't put the whole thing back together again. All I can tell you is that underneath the vehicle, there's not a lot of room. If you're somewhere in the southern states and you guys are blessed with not as much salt as we have here in Canada, or someplace in the world where you don't get salt, you're great. But if you got a 34-year-old Mustang that's been driven a couple winters up here in the north, that salt and rust just does a number on it, and it is a bear to get that steering rack out. It essentially took me a week just to get to this point. So a week, a couple Saturdays, and 4 or 5 weeknights just working at home on this. And now I still got to put the new steering rack in. So anyways, rag joint replacement. You can see how the thing goes together, what you need to do to get it out. I've seen videos on YouTube where the guys get it out and they get it out fairly easy. Such is the story with mine. Things never seem to be easy. But anyways, hopefully it shows you how to take it out, how to put this back together again. And you can see from what's going on here in the shaft what you need to be careful of when you put it back in the vehicle. And being how tight that is to get just even the base part back on the shaft here, you're gonna have to hammer that on. You know what, you may even want to contemplate maybe even just removing the whole steering rack to replace the rag joint. Anyways, you got some options there, but it's not an easy afternoon fix. At least it wasn't for me. So anyways, hope the video helps you guys, and if you're going to do one of these, good luck with that, and hopefully yours goes back together and the first time around. Cheers, happy motoring.